Welcome back. You're watching Beyond the Headline. They say age is just a number. It certainly is for 80-year-old U.S. President Joe Biden, who today formally launched his re-election bid, asking Americans to give him more time to, quote-unquote, finish the job, saying we're still in a battle for the soul of America. The announcement was made in a 3-minute video and comes on the 4th anniversary of when Biden first declared his bid for presidency of the White House in 2019. He's already the oldest president in U.S. history when he first took office in 2021, aged 78, and will be 82 at his second inauguration if he is to win, and 86 by the time he leaves office. Almost a decade older than the previous record holder Ronald Reagan, who finished his second term at 77. Although Biden's annual medical report released this Feb says he is fit for the top job, questions continue on his age. But that's not the only challenge, frankly, facing Biden. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine war that has strained the economy, inflation woes, and the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan are still fresh in public memory. This was evident in the latest round of approval ratings, where Biden got only 39% approval, as opposed to the 55% he received when he took office in Jan 2021. So will Biden be able to tide over these challenges? Importantly, with all of the buzz around Mr. Trump, are we going to see a second round of Trump versus Biden? To speak more on this, I'm joined now by Ray Locker, journalist and author, Spencer Critchley, political analyst and author of Patriots of Two Nations, and Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the show. Ray, let me begin with your take. Of course, no big surprises that Biden has gone in for a re-election, but is that the best bet for the Democratic Party right now?
Well, I think it's the hand they've been dealt. I mean, he is the incumbent president. It's hard to beat an incumbent president. There are no challengers of any note in the Democratic Party. I don't count Robert Kennedy Jr. as a credible candidate. So he's going to have a clear path to the nomination. But as you mentioned, the problem is he's 80 years old. Everybody knows it. There's no escaping it. The best thing Biden has going for him on the age front is if he runs against Donald Trump, he's running for a guy who's basically the same age, who arguably is in less good a health as Biden is.
So are we going to see a Trump versus Biden again, Spencer Critchley? And I want to understand that in the American political context, is age that big an issue right now? I was just looking up. The median age in America is about 38 years. Is it a concern for voters if a presidential candidate is 80 plus?
Yes, I think there's no denying that that's a concern, and I think it's a legitimate concern. But I think also, as President Biden points out, judging by how he's doing the job, and by that standard, he's doing very well. And even if you disagree with his policies, I happen to agree with them. But even if you disagree with them, he's demonstrated that he's very focused, very energetic, and gets a lot of stuff done, including what almost nobody expected is major bipartisan legislation like the gun legislation and the infrastructure legislation that we've seen recently. As I say, I think that age is always a legitimate concern, but I think that the president will be able to address that as he goes along. And an important part of that is to trust that he has good people in place, including his vice president, in case his health should take a turn for the worse. But I agree, if age is a concern for President Biden, it should certainly be a concern about President Trump, who is nearly as old and has a far less healthy lifestyle and shows every sign of not being particularly healthy. Also, I think that President Biden's repetition of the phrase, the soul of America, is not just an empty political slogan. I think that gets to the heart of the matter. What this really comes down to is not traditional Democrats versus Republicans. President Trump's MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, is classic ethnic nationalist authoritarianism, as we've seen rising in other countries around the world. This is really about whether people on the left and the right want to preserve our democracy.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, do you see this as a Biden versus Trump contest again? And what are the implications on a global level? I mean, the US presidential election has everyone's attention for various reasons. From the Indian context, is a Biden return good for us? How does it matter?
Yeah, no, of course it matters greatly. It matters hugely for the world, and it matters hugely for India also. Although having said that, I would say that, for the last 20 years, all the presidents who have occupied the White House, they have worked extremely well with the Indian leadership, and India-US partnership has continued to grow over the last 22 years. Now, you mentioned that is it likely Biden-Trump? I think one could say that these are early days. It's still about 1.5 years to go before the elections take place. But as the other panelists have said, there doesn't seem to be any other credible challenger as far as Mr. Biden is concerned in the Democratic Party. And as far as the Republicans are concerned, also, it would appear that Mr. Trump is the front runner as of now. Of course, that slate is pretty full. There are a large number of contenders for that position. Now, Mr. Biden, I would say that his track record, irrespective of what his approval ratings might be, 39%, that is within the country. But I think Mr. Biden has been extremely, okay, let me not use very strong words, has been very good for the world. He brought America back onto the Paris Accord, onto the agreement. This was a dealt hand to him as far as Afghanistan is concerned. You mentioned about that. It could have been done in a more professional way, but it was done in a very sloppy manner in which the troops left. But otherwise, as far as NATO is concerned, just 2 years ago, it was being said that it is brain dead. I think NATO has never been so active as it is today, with 2 more members coming on board. The alliances are very strong. The transatlantic alliance is very strong. The alliance between America and East Asia is very strong, which was really in tatters when Mr. Trump left. So I think this is he has done well with the world, and definitely he's done extremely well with India. What we've seen that although the Quad format was revived by Mr. Trump in 2017, but I think more energy and much greater enthusiasm and passion has come into Quad, because the first meeting took place in September 2021, the summit meeting.
Right.
Of course, the virtual summit meeting had taken place before that, and now we are having in-person summit meetings, last year in Tokyo, this year in Sydney. So I think Quad is there. The manner in which Europe and the United States together has been able to stand up against Russia, I think no one could have really expected. He has brought Europe also together. And I think the messaging that is going out on Taiwan is also very, very clear. Tamanna.
Okay, let's listen in. Let's listen in to Joe Biden and what he said when announcing his intention to run again.
Freedom, personal freedom, is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term, to fight for our democracy.
This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it. But around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote.
All right, that was part of the sort of ad that went out when he was announcing his bid. And we're probably going to see a lot more of that. Ray, I wanted to get your view on whether this is going to be a clear Biden versus Trump contest again. And is the combination likely to be the same, Biden and Kamala? Because if you look at the expectations with which this duo came in and look at the current day, there definitely been a sense that they didn't achieve everything that was expected. Is that going to be a concern? Or is there no one else to contest?
Well, he's not going to be challenged in the Democratic Party. There's no one who's going to beat him for the renomination. I mean, he beat Donald Trump by 7 million votes. And I think the margin will be wider this time. I don't know whose expectations you're talking about, but he's pretty much blown them away. The Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the gun bill. I mean, these are all things that people thought weren't going to happen. And now he's running against a party that controls the House that is in a total disarray. Its margin is only 3 votes. Part of it's held together by a guy who's an acknowledged liar, George Santos out of New York. I mean, Kevin McCarthy has no debt reduction plan. He's holding the budget and the economy hostage with this whole debt ceiling problem. So, I mean, Biden's in good shape. If he wasn't 80 years old, we really wouldn't be having this conversation. If he was 65, it would be no problem.
That's that's fair. Not to be ageist, but the fact is that he is 80, it's unprecedented, but maybe, he's fit. This is a different era with medical support, etc. So maybe it's not going to be such a big concern. But Ray, just to follow up, on the other side, is it looking like a Biden versus Trump contest again, or are there more contenders emerging from the other side?
Well, so far, none of the Republican contenders have shown the fortitude to take on Trump directly. I mean, they want the nomination, they want to run against Trump, but they're afraid to. They don't want to draw his fire. I mean, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is not even an official candidate, and he's getting hammered by Trump. The only person who seems to show any appetite for it is former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who in 2016, when he ran against Trump, didn't really go after him and was one of the first people to endorse him during the primary campaign. Now he's born again and wants to tackle Trump as, a stronger challenger. I don't think he's got it in him. I think DeSantis is probably the guy who has the best shot, but he's not really the warm and fuzziest kind of guy, and he's really turning off a lot of voters. There are people who would hope that Trump and DeSantis would get in some kind of cage match and they could, take advantage of that and show that they're an alternative. But so far, none of that is really happening. So barring any major change, Trump seems to be the favorite, as stunning as that may be.
Have a sense of deja vu in 2024, once again, the same sort of combination and same kind of fight. Mr. Critchley, I must come to certain recent events with Fox News and defamation, fake news, Tucker Carlson, all of that. Are you going to see the likelihood of that very extreme polarization coming back into public life and into the voter imagination ahead of a similar contest? Just a few years later? Nothing really has changed as far as that social fabric is concerned, is it?
No, that's quite right. I think there's been a lot of false hopes, which I never, frankly, bought into, that as Trump left office, or even as he got into various political crises and scandals during his time in office, that this would, as the phrase went, break the fever in the Republican Party. And I think that's to misread the historic trend that we're living through that is not going to be finished anytime soon. I actually, if I may get into this in some depth in my book, this is one way of looking at this is that every modern nation, and many people are really not aware of how recently created the Western nations were. Italy and Germany, for example, late 19th century. Many other nations are, in fact, younger as nations than the United States is. And as has often been observed by political scientists, every nation depends on a shared story about what that nation is in order to unite it. And the story in the United States for a long time was the story of liberal democracy, and people agreed with the fundamental principles written into our Constitution. At least most people did. But there's always been an alternative view of America that rejects those principles and sees America essentially as an ethnic nation, not a civic constitutional nation, a nation designed for one particular ethnic group, one religion, one race in many cases. And we fought a civil war over these two competing visions. And that competition is back. There are millions upon millions of Americans who reject the liberal democratic view, liberalism broadly defined from conservatives to progressive liberals, who reject that view and want to go back to essentially pre-Enlightenment days, pre-modern days, and go back to an ethnic national model that's supposedly only intended for people of a particular religion or culture or race or a combination of all three of those things. And
Right.
unfortunately, television and the fragmentation of our media through the internet and social media has made that much, much worse. It happens to amplify the counter-Enlightenment view of America, the pre-modern view of America that's based much more on this more mystical, ethnic identity-driven vision of a nation. And the Democrats have struggled to catch up with that because Democrats are very much of the Enlightenment, as are moderate conservatives. And they keep making the argument based on facts and logic, and even, the argument on Joe Biden's historically strong record. He has one of the strongest records of any president in 5 or 6 decades. But that's a factual argument, a reason-based argument, and it gains no traction with people who are committed to this other worldview, which is exemplified by the Fox News universe and the other parts of what's sometimes called that media bubble. That's an enormously difficult historic challenge that the United States is facing, and so are other Western democracies as they see a resurgence of this ethnic nationalism, which tends towards authoritarianism very easily. And then the endpoint of that is fascism, which is where I think Donald Trump already is. And that's really what's going on here, I believe, as the most important issue that, if you'll forgive the double meaning of the word, trumps all others.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I want to thank you all for coming in and giving perspective to the viewers who tune into this show on what's going on right now in American politics and how significant it is that Joe Biden has officially thrown his hat in the ring. We need to wait and see whether we're going to see the same scenario play out 4 years later, and will that mean the same kind of polarization and tension in American society? But thank you so much to all of you for joining us.